17. Black actresses who were the worst drug addicts in Hollywood. Hollywood loves the spotlight but avoids responsibility. While black women were praised as icons of strength, beauty, and excellence, many were silently breaking behind closed doors. Fame gave them visibility, not protection. Success brought applause, not safety. Addiction did not appear randomly, it grew in the spaces where support, care, and understanding were missing. These stories are not scandals or rumors, but documented histories the industry rarely confronts. You're watching Legends of Black Excellence. If these truths matter to you, stay with us. Share your perspective and subscribe, because real excellence includes telling the stories Hollywood would rather forget. Tamara Dobson. Tamara Dobson entered Hollywood like a thunderclap. Standing over 6 feet tall, with model poise and commanding presence, she shattered expectations in Cleopatra Jones' 1973, becoming one of the first black female action heroes in American cinema. At a time when black women were rarely allowed power on screen, Dobson carried herself as fearless, intelligent, and unapologetically dominant. The film was a box office success, earning millions on a modest budget and briefly positioning her as a symbol of cultural shift. Yet Hollywood's support proved fragile. When the blaxploitation wave faded, so did the phone calls. Contracts disappeared, studios moved on, and Dobson, once marketed as a breakthrough, was quietly sidelined. Cut off from opportunity, isolation set in. By the late 1970s, friends later recalled that alcohol and prescription medication became coping mechanisms rather than indulgences. The industry that once applauded her offered no safety net, no transition, no long-term plan. How many stars are celebrated for changing the game, only to be abandoned once the trend ends? That unanswered question haunted Dobson's later years. Public appearances grew rare, and when she resurfaced at a 1987 fashion event, the contrast shocked observers. The once mythic figure appeared frail, signaling how deeply the years of neglect had taken their toll. Her struggles were compounded by severe health challenges. Diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, Dobson endured progressive paralysis and respiratory weakness. Financial pressure forced her to sell memorabilia from Cleopatra Jones, a painful reversal for someone who once headlined premieres. She spent her final years in a Baltimore care facility, far from Hollywood lights, living quietly and largely forgotten by the industry she helped transform. Tamara Dobson died in 2006, at age 59. Her story is not one of scandal, but of systemic failure. Proof that pioneering black actresses were often celebrated for impact, then discarded without protection. Her legacy endures as both inspiration and warning. Pam Grier. Pam Grier did not enter Hollywood quietly. She arrived in the early 1970s as a cultural force redefining what power looked like for black women on screen. With Coffee 1973 and Foxy Brown 1974, she became the first black female action star to headline box office hits, generating millions for American International Pictures and changing the visual language of cinema. Tall, fearless, and uncompromising Grier represented autonomy at a time when few actresses were allowed authority, let alone physical dominance. Away from cameras, the era carried a darker cost. Hollywood in the mid-1970s was saturated with cocaine long nights and little protection. Grier later confirmed that drug use became common in her social and professional circles, less about indulgence than survival under relentless pressure. Over time, the toll became physical. Doctors eventually diagnosed severe reproductive damage, which Grier has publicly linked to years of substance use and extreme stress. The most permanent consequence was infertility. She has stated in interviews that learning she could not have children cut deeper than losing roles or status. Careers can be rebuilt, but certain losses cannot. Unlike many contemporaries, Grier confronted her reality, stepped away from drugs, and reclaimed control over her life before addiction consumed her entirely. Her endurance reshaped her legacy. In 1997, Quentin Tarantino cast her in Jackie Brown, restoring her to critical acclaim and reframing her as a cinematic legend rather than a forgotten symbol. Pam Grier's story is not defined by addiction alone. It stands as evidence of survival honesty and the hidden price paid by pioneers. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge was not simply a movie star. She was a historical rupture in Hollywood's racial barrier. In 1954, her performance in Carmen Jones earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, making her the first black woman to reach that level of recognition. The moment suggested progress, yet it proved dangerously misleading. Studios celebrated her image while refusing to offer roles equal to her talent, especially opposite white male leads. Fame arrived without stability, and applause never translated into protection. When the spotlight dimmed, pressure multiplied. Her marriage to dancer Harold Nicholas collapsed, followed by a second marriage marked by financial control and emotional cruelty. At the same time, Dandridge was raising her daughter Harolyn, who lived with severe developmental disabilities. Balancing grief, guilt, and public expectation became unbearable. Alcohol and prescription barbiturates entered her life gradually, not as spectacle, but as quiet escape. How does a trailblazer survive when the industry praises her courage, yet withholds opportunity? By the early 1960s, her situation deteriorated. Missed performances, mounting debt, and emotional exhaustion replaced red carpets. Friends described mood swings and withdrawal, while biographers later confirmed substance dependence through medical and personal records. Hollywood, having moved on, offered little assistance or compassion. On September 8, 1965, Dorothy Dandridge was found dead in her West Hollywood apartment at just 42 years old. The coroner cited an embolism, but toxicology reports confirmed a lethal mixture of alcohol and antidepressants. Her death closed a chapter that should have marked a beginning. Dorothy Dandridge's legacy endures as a breakthrough and a warning for Hollywood history. It still echoes through generations today, worldwide audiences. Tina Turner. Tina Turner's story is often told as one of triumph, but the road to survival was paved with violence, control, and substance abuse that nearly destroyed her long before her legendary comeback. Born Anna Mae Bullock in 1939, she rose from rural Tennessee to global fame as part of Ike and Tina Turner, delivering explosive performances that redefined live rock and soul in the 1960s and 1970s. On stage, she embodied strength. Off stage, her reality was far more fragile. Ike Turner controlled nearly every aspect of her life: finances, movement, career direction, and personal freedom. In her own memoirs and sworn interviews, Tina confirmed years of severe physical abuse. To endure relentless touring, fear and exhaustion, cocaine and prescription drugs became part of her daily environment, often introduced and enforced by Ike himself. By the mid-1970s, the damage was undeniable. She suffered emotional collapse, chronic insomnia, and a suicide attempt involving sleeping pills, which she later described as a breaking point rather than a desire for fame's end. In 1976, after a violent assault before a Dallas concert, Tina fled with just 36 cents and a gas card. 2 years later, she finalized her divorce, relinquishing money and property, but reclaiming one thing: her name. The aftermath was brutal. Tina performed in small venues to pay off debt exceeding $500,000. Her eventual comeback in the 1980s was historic, yet she openly acknowledged that addiction and abuse had stolen her youth. Tina Turner's legacy is not only resilience, but proof that survival itself can be revolutionary. Natalie Cole. Natalie Cole was born into musical royalty, but that inheritance came with a crushing weight. As the daughter of Nat King Cole, expectations followed her from childhood into adulthood. When she emerged in the mid-1970s with hits like "This Will Be," she quickly proved her talent was real, earning multiple Grammy Awards before the age of 30. To the public, she appeared confident and unstoppable. Privately, pressure and unresolved grief were already shaping a dangerous path. While attending the University of Massachusetts Amherst, Cole was first exposed to heroin and cocaine, a fact she later confirmed in her own memoir. What began as experimentation soon became dependency intensified by the fear that she would never live up to her father's legacy. How do you build your own identity when the world measures you against a legend? That question haunted her early career. By the early 1980s, her addiction had escalated, affecting both her health and professional reliability. In May 1983, Natalie Cole nearly died from an overdose in a Los Angeles apartment. Medical staff used emergency defibrillation to revive her, a documented incident that marked the lowest point of her life. She entered rehabilitation shortly afterward, beginning a long and uneven recovery process. Although she achieved sobriety, doctors later confirmed that years of substance abuse had permanently weakened her heart and kidneys. Her comeback in the 1990s was remarkable, unforgettable. With Love sold over 7 million copies worldwide and earned 6 Grammy Awards, restoring her career and public trust. Yet Cole acknowledged that recovery did not erase physical consequences. She died in 2015 from heart failure complications widely linked to long-term drug damage. Natalie Cole's story is one of survival, accountability, and the enduring cost of addiction hidden behind fame. Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi Goldberg's rise in Hollywood was unconventional, fearless, and fast. Emerging from New York's experimental theater scene, she broke through in 1985 with The Color Purple, earning an Academy Award nomination and instant recognition as a generational talent. Her intelligence, timing, and emotional range set her apart. Yet behind that momentum, Goldberg was navigating a private struggle few audiences recognized. In the early 1980s, before worldwide fame arrived, Goldberg later confirmed a cocaine addiction. The drug functioned less as excess than escape from insecurity, relationship collapse, and pressure to prove herself inside a demanding industry. Cocaine entered her routine during stage work and Broadway performances, creating a dangerous double life hidden beneath applause. Colleagues later recalled physical strain, sweat-soaked costumes, trembling hands, and emotional volatility backstage, while her on-stage presence remained controlled enough to earn standing ovations. Goldberg admitted she performed while high, believing the substance sharpened focus when it deepened isolation. The moment of clarity arrived when she recognized addiction would eventually erase everything she was building. Choosing intervention over denial, Goldberg quit cocaine mid-1980s, rebuilding discipline and trust. Her recovery preserved a historic career. In 1991, she won an Academy Award for Ghost, later completing the rare EGOT distinction across film, television, music, and theater. Whoopi Goldberg's story is not collapse, but timing. It shows how honesty, support, and self-awareness can redirect destiny. Her survival became example, not caution. For Hollywood, it remains a reminder: talent survives when help arrives before silence wins. That lesson still matters today, deeply everywhere. Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey's public image represents control, clarity, and emotional authority, yet her early years in television were marked by chaos few viewers ever imagined. Born into poverty and shaped by childhood abuse, she entered broadcast journalism, carrying unresolved trauma into an unforgiving industry. In the early 1980s, while working in Baltimore television, Winfrey became involved in a relationship defined by emotional dependence and substance abuse, a period she later acknowledged as deeply destructive. During that time, cocaine and crack entered her life not as glamour, but as escape. Long nights blurred into mornings, and isolation intensified away from the camera. Friends later described an Oprah who felt overwhelmed, ashamed, and afraid her career would collapse before it truly began. How close do you think success can come to disappearing before the world ever notices? That question sits at the center of her transformation. In 1983, just weeks before her move to Chicago to host AM Chicago, Winfrey reached a breaking point. She has openly stated that a single night of heavy drug use forced her to confront the reality that addiction would end her future. There were no public scandals, no police reports, and no tabloid headlines, only a private reckoning that redirected her life. She severed ties with destructive relationships and quit drugs, entirely choosing discipline over denial. What followed is well documented. AM Chicago became the Oprah Winfrey Show, running for 25 years and reaching millions daily. Her career expanded into film publishing, philanthropy, and ownership, building a media empire valued in the billions. Winfrey has consistently credited sobriety, structure, and self-reflection as the foundation of that success. End. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston rose to fame as one of the most gifted vocalists in modern music history. In the mid-1980s, her debut album sold more than 25 million copies worldwide, and she became the first woman to score 7 consecutive #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100. To the public, Whitney represented perfection, effortless range, flawless image, and global dominance. Behind that image, pressure quietly eroded her stability. By the early 1990s, non-stop touring, relentless media scrutiny, and expectations to surpass herself created emotional strain. Her marriage to Bobby Brown intensified instability, bringing public conflict and deeper exposure to drugs. Cocaine and later crack entered her life not as rumor, but as reality, she eventually acknowledged. Warning signs appeared by the late 1990s. Canceled performances, erratic interviews, and a noticeable decline in vocal control alarmed fans and industry insiders. Despite multiple attempts at rehabilitation, lasting recovery proved elusive. In 2009, her comeback album sold more than 3 million copies worldwide, confirming enduring demand. Yet medical professionals later noted that years of substance abuse had already weakened her heart and lungs. On February 11, 2012, Whitney Houston was found unresponsive in a Beverly Hills hotel bathtub. The official coroner's report ruled her death an accidental drowning, with cocaine use and heart disease listed as contributing factors. She was 48 years old. This conclusion is based on confirmed toxicology, not speculation. Whitney Houston's legacy transcends her struggles. With over 200 million records sold globally, she remains a defining voice of her era. Her story. Chaka Khan. Chaka Khan emerged in the 1970s as a force of nature. As the lead voice of Rufus and later as a solo star, she delivered one of the most recognizable sounds in American music history. Songs like Tell Me Something Good and I'm Every Woman helped sell millions of records, while her vocal power set a standard few could approach. Publicly, Khan appeared unstoppable, confident, glamorous, and in total command of the stage. Privately, the pace of success came at a severe cost. Endless touring, late-night studio sessions, and industry pressure pushed Khan into long-term substance abuse. She later confirmed addiction to cocaine and heroin during the late 1970s and early 1980s, a period when drug use was normalized and rarely confronted in the music business. What begins as stamina often becomes dependency. How many careers were quietly shortened by an industry that never slowed down? That question sits at the heart of Khan's struggle. By the mid-1980s, consequences surfaced. Missed opportunities, canceled contracts, and alarming health incidents followed. In multiple interviews, Khan acknowledged overdoses and emotional collapse, admitting that addiction stole nearly a decade of her prime creative years. Unlike rumor-driven narratives, her account has been consistent and documented through rehabilitation records and public statements. Rehabilitation marked a turning point. Khan entered recovery programs and gradually rebuilt discipline, even as physical and emotional scars remained. Her return to music restored respect, though she has stated openly that addiction permanently altered her trajectory. Awards followed, including 10 Grammy wins, but they came alongside reflection rather than denial. Chaka Khan's story is not downfall, it is reclamation. Her voice endured, but her journey exposed how brilliance can survive only when truth replaces silence. Vanity. Vanity born. Denise Katrina Matthews rose in the early 1980s as a symbol of fearless glamour and raw charisma. Discovered and mentored by Prince, she became the face of Vanity 6, dominating pop culture with provocative style and unapologetic confidence. Songs like Nasty Girl climbed the charts, while film roles such as The Last Dragon 1985 positioned her as one of the decade's most recognizable black female stars. To the public, Vanity embodied control, desire, and freedom. Behind that image, her reality was unraveling. Vanity later confirmed that heavy cocaine use escalated into crack addiction during the mid-1980s. What began as immersion in a drug-saturated celebrity environment became dependency. Fame amplified temptation, while few around her intervened. By the late 1980s, her career collapsed. Record deals vanished, acting opportunities dried up, and repeated medical emergencies followed. Doctors eventually linked her severe kidney failure directly to prolonged cocaine abuse. Vanity spent years dependent on daily dialysis, a brutal contrast to the vibrant image that once filled magazine covers. Financial strain followed as medical costs mounted, forcing her into a quieter, isolated life far from Hollywood. In the 1990s, Vanity renounced drugs fame and even her stage name. She embraced sobriety and faith openly, acknowledging that survival required complete separation from her past. Recovery saved her life, but could not undo the damage already done. Vanity died on February 15, 2016, at age 57 from kidney failure. Her story is not scandal, it is documented consequence. Fame did not destroy her. Addiction did slowly and publicly while the industry watched. Queen Latifah. Queen Latifah entered the public eye as a symbol of strength, confidence, and balance. Emerging in the late 1980s, she quickly stood apart in hip-hop with intelligence and authority, using music like You and I to Y to challenge misogyny while building a powerful image of self-respect. By the early 1990s, she was expanding into acting, positioning herself as one of the few black women able to move between music, film, and television without losing credibility. From the outside, her life appeared controlled and purposeful. That image shattered in March 1992 when her older brother, Lancelot Owens, died in a motorcycle accident. Latifah later described the loss as devastating, removing the emotional anchor in her life. Grief overwhelmed discipline. Alcohol entered first, followed by drugs, as a way to numb pain she could not process publicly. Friends later recalled long periods of isolation, emotional withdrawal, and reckless behavior that contrasted sharply with her public persona. How does someone known for empowerment survive when their private foundation collapses overnight? That question marked her darkest period. Throughout the mid-1990s, addiction affected her focus and career momentum. Several opportunities were delayed or lost as she struggled with instability. Latifah herself has acknowledged that substance abuse slowed her transition into film and nearly derailed her future. Unlike many peers, she reached a moment of clarity before permanent damage occurred. Therapy, sobriety, and family support gradually replaced self-destruction. By the late 1990s, she regained control, delivering critically praised performances in Set It Off and later establishing herself as a respected producer and actress. Her recovery was not dramatic or publicized, but deliberate and sustained. Queen Latifah's story is not one of collapse, but interruption. Addiction briefly redirected her path, yet accountability restored it. Her survival underscores that strength is not the absence of breaking, but the courage to rebuild quietly and completely. Mary J. Blige. Mary J. Blige rose from hardship to become the defining voice of hip-hop soul. Emerging in the early 1990s, her debut album, What's the 411, helped sell millions of records and reshaped R&B by blending raw emotion with street realism. Her voice carried pain, resilience, and honesty that resonated deeply with audiences. Yet that authenticity came from lived trauma. Years of childhood abuse, poverty, and emotional instability followed her into sudden fame. As her career accelerated, alcohol and cocaine became coping mechanisms rather than indulgences. Blige later confirmed that throughout much of the 1990s, she was heavily dependent on both, often recording music while intoxicated. The pressure to perform, tour, and remain visible left little space for healing. One of the most disturbing consequences was memory loss. Blige has openly stated that there are entire albums and studio sessions she cannot remember completing. Friends and collaborators noticed moments of emotional detachment and exhaustion, even as her music climbed the charts. Despite commercial success, her personal life was unraveling behind closed doors. The turning point came in the early 2000s. Blige committed to sobriety therapy and self-reflection, acknowledging that survival required confronting her addiction honestly. Recovery transformed both her health and artistry. She later earned multiple Grammy Awards and in 2017 received an Academy Award nomination for Mudbound, proving longevity was possible after collapse. Mary J. Blige's story is not defined by addiction, but by accountability. Drugs did not create her pain, they exploited it. Her legacy stands as proof that healing can reclaim years thought permanently lost. Jada Pinkett Smith. Jada Pinkett Smith entered Hollywood in the early 1990s with intensity, intelligence, and fearless ambition. Roles in Menace II, Society, and Set It Off. 96 established her as a commanding screen presence at a young age. To the public, she appeared disciplined, confident, and emotionally guarded, an actress in control of her image. Privately, however, her early success collided with unresolved trauma and self-destructive coping. In later interviews, Jada openly admitted that during her 20s, she struggled with heavy alcohol use, marijuana, and cocaine. This period coincided with sudden fame, unstable relationships, and deep insecurity about identity and self-worth. Partying became routine rather than occasional, and substance use structured her days. What happens when success arrives before emotional stability ever has a chance to form? That question defined her internal battle. Addiction did not immediately derail her career, but it quietly hollowed out her sense of purpose. By the mid-1990s, the consequences surfaced. Jada has acknowledged moments of shaking on set, emotional volatility, and fear that she was losing control. During the filming of Set It Off, production was briefly disrupted as she struggled with exhaustion and instability. She later stated plainly that if she had continued on that path, she believed she would not have survived past 25. Motherhood became the turning point. The responsibility of raising children forced her to confront addiction honestly. Jada chose sobriety not through scandal or legal intervention, but through self-awareness and discipline. She has stated she has remained sober for over 2 decades. Jada Pinkett Smith's story is not about downfall, it is about interruption. Addiction threatened to erase her future early, but accountability reclaimed it. Her journey underscores that survival sometimes begins long before the world ever sees the damage. Naomi Campbell. Naomi Campbell did not simply break barriers in fashion, she shattered them. Rising in the late 1980s, she became the first black supermodel to dominate global runways, front luxury campaigns, and appear on the covers of Vogue and Time. By the early 1990s, Campbell was one of the most photographed women in the world, symbolizing beauty power and exclusivity in an industry that had long excluded women who looked like her. Publicly, her career seemed flawless. Privately, the pressure was relentless. Constant travel, brutal schedules, racism within fashion houses, and intense media scrutiny created emotional instability. In the mid to late 1990s, Campbell later admitted that cocaine became part of her life, used to cope with exhaustion, anger, and loneliness rather than celebration. Her addiction did not remain hidden for long. Erratic behavior, Emotional outbursts and volatility began appearing in public, damaging both her reputation and professional relationships. Between 1999 and 2007, Campbell entered rehabilitation multiple times. These were not rumors, but documented treatments she publicly acknowledged. During this period, her career fluctuated. Major contracts were paused, endorsements withdrawn, and headlines focused more on scandal than achievement. She later stated that addiction magnified unresolved trauma and rage, turning private pain into public spectacle. Recovery was neither immediate nor linear. Campbell committed to therapy, sobriety, and accountability, gradually rebuilding trust within the industry. By the 2010s, she had re-established herself as a respected veteran mentor and fashion authority, continuing to headline major campaigns well into her 50s. Naomi Campbell's story is not one of collapse, but confrontation. Addiction threatened to redefine her legacy, yet honesty reclaimed it. Her survival exposed the cost of success in a system that profits from icons but rarely protects them. Stacey Dash. Stacey Dash became a pop culture fixture in the mid-1990s after her breakout role as Dion in Clueless 1995. With sharp delivery, striking beauty, and effortless style, she embodied youthful confidence at a time when Hollywood was hungry for fresh faces. To audiences, Dash appeared carefree and successful, moving easily between film, television, and fashion-driven visibility. Behind that image, however, her personal foundation had been fractured long before fame arrived. Dash has publicly stated that substance abuse entered her life during childhood. Growing up in a household marked by instability and addiction, she was exposed to prescription drugs at an unusually young age. By adulthood, dependency had shifted toward Vicodin, transforming from occasional relief into daily necessity. As her career advanced, the pressure to remain visible and relevant intensified the habit. How does someone build stability when addiction begins before identity fully forms? That question shaped much of Dash's struggle. By the early 2000s, her addiction had escalated dramatically. Dash later admitted taking up to 20 pills a day at her lowest point. Financial problems followed, professional opportunities diminished, and relationships deteriorated. One documented incident involved her collapsing in a bathroom with pills nearby while her young child was home, a moment she later described as her emotional bottom. These were not tabloid exaggerations, but confessions she made herself years later. Recovery came slowly. Dash entered treatment, confronted long-standing trauma, and committed to sobriety. Although her career never fully returned to its Clueless peak, survival reshaped her priorities. She has spoken about addiction as something that stole years of clarity, confidence, and momentum. Stacey Dash's story is not about scandal. It is about early exposure, unchecked dependency, and the long shadow addiction can cast over potential, especially when it begins before adulthood ever truly starts. Brandy Norwood. Brandy Norwood rose to fame as America's teenage sweetheart, carrying a level of visibility few young performers could withstand. In the mid-1990s, she dominated television with Moesha, while simultaneously topping music charts with multi-platinum albums. Before turning 20, Brandy had sold millions of records, won major awards, and was positioned as a role model for an entire generation. Publicly, her image was polished, wholesome, and controlled. Privately, the pressure was crushing. The demand to remain perfect vocally, visually, and emotionally created isolation rather than confidence. By the late 1990s, Brandy later admitted she was battling severe depression, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. Drugs and alcohol entered her life as coping tools, not excess. Prescription pills and heavy drinking became ways to quiet intrusive thoughts and escape relentless expectations. Brandy has spoken openly about moments when she felt detached from life itself. She described sitting alone in hotel rooms, surrounded by pills and alcohol, writing in journals about wanting the pain to stop. Several professional commitments were quietly disrupted as friends intervened during periods of emotional collapse. Unlike rumors, these admissions came directly from Brandy in later interviews, emphasizing mental health rather than spectacle. The turning point arrived when she recognized survival required honesty. Therapy, sobriety, and stepping back from constant exposure allowed her to rebuild stability. Recovery did not erase the damage, but it prevented tragedy. Over time, Brandy returned to music and acting with greater boundaries and self-awareness. Brandy Norwood's story is not about downfall. It is about how unchecked pressure can nearly erase even the brightest light. Her survival reframed her legacy not as perfection, but resilience earned the hard way. Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday was one of the most influential voices in American music. Yet her life unfolded as a prolonged battle between brilliance and destruction. Emerging in the 1930s and 1940s, she transformed jazz singing with a style rooted in vulnerability rather than polish. Songs like Strange Fruit forced America to confront racial violence, while her phrasing reshaped vocal expression for generations. Publicly, she was revered as an artist of rare emotional depth. Privately, trauma defined her world. Holiday endured childhood abuse, poverty, and exploitation long before fame arrived. Heroin entered her life in her 20s initially through abusive relationships and a music industry where drugs were common and ignored. Addiction quickly became a constant presence, eroding her health and stability. What happens when pain is turned into art but never allowed to heal? That question shadowed her entire career. Despite addiction, Holiday continued performing at elite clubs, often singing with needles, still visible nearby according to documented accounts. In 1947, she was arrested for heroin possession and sentenced to prison. The conviction stripped her of her cabaret card legally, barring her from performing in New York clubs and devastating her income. While white contemporaries received treatment, Holiday was criminalized, her illness treated as a crime. By the late 1950s, years of substance abuse had destroyed her liver and heart. In 1959, she was hospitalized in New York, critically ill and barely able to speak. Police raided her hospital room, arrested her again, and handcuffed her to the bed after allegedly finding drugs. She died on July 17, 1959, at age 44, under police guard. Billie Holiday's legacy is immortal, but her ending remains haunting. She was not simply an addict, she was a victim of trauma, racism, and punishment masquerading as justice. For decades, Hollywood profited from black brilliance while quietly ignoring black pain. These stories are not gossip scandals or clickbait. They are documented histories of talent pushed to the edge by pressure, neglect, and silence. Addiction did not appear in a vacuum. It grew where protection was absent and expectations were cruel. Some survived and reclaimed their lives. Others paid the ultimate price. At Legends of Black Excellence, we don't ask you to judge, we ask you to think. Was addiction the real villain? Or was it the system that created the conditions for collapse?